Stewart to second the report.
Thank you, Provost. A key part of the social contract, and hence the commitment of this Council and its partners, has to be the protection of the vulnerable and those unable to look after themselves. There's much to be commended in the report in terms of the strengths identified, the action taken and the outcomes achieved. But this field of activity is one in which standstill alone is not good enough, and continuous improvement is not possible unless you're able to identify the areas and opportunities for that improvement. So it's therefore important to note that the report also identifies those areas of development where action can be taken with a view to improvements being made in the future. As we heard at the Integration Joint Board meeting last Friday that was referred to by Mr Atkinson, a key recommendation of the report is hence to provide future annual updates in order that we can scrutinise the performance and improvements made. Provost, I'm happy to second the report and commend it to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Are there any comments on the report? No? Can we agree the report? Agreed. Thank you. Item 12, update on child sexual exploitation. Okay. Chief Social Work Officer Jackie Pepper to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. Councillors in Perth Kinross have supported a proactive approach to tackling child sexual exploitation since early in 2015, when at a meeting of Perth Kinross Council, the detailed findings of an independent inquiry led by Alexis J into systemic failures in Rotherham were considered. And at that time, councillors agreed to establish a zero-tolerance approach to child sexual abuse and exploitation. The Perth Kinross Multi-Agency CSE, Child Sexual Exploitation Working Group, was established with 4 work streams which mirror the key areas in the Scottish Government's National Action Plan. That's prevention, intervention and disruption and recovery. The working group reports on its work to the Perth Kinross Child Protection Committee at its meetings, and elected members have sought regular updates on this work, the work that's been taken forward locally to prevent and disrupt CSE. This report provides a summary of work across partners aimed at ensuring that we establish and sustain a hostile environment in Perth and Kinross. Progress is set out in the work plan, as well as an ongoing focus. So I think that's recognition that a proactive and continuing approach is required to this key area of risk. The report, work plan and evaluation of the Stop to Listen Pathfinder work show notable progress in ensuring that the voices, views and experiences of young people are directing the approach that we're taking, and I'm happy to receive any questions.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions of the report? Councillor Drysdale. Councillor.
Thank you, Provost. Just looking at the RAG report, starting on page 449 of the papers. Obviously, there's a lot of green remarks relating to a number of the areas, but there are 2 or 3 amber ones which seem to relate to the provision of advice, the dissemination of advice and communication to various groups, children and adults for that matter. And I'm just wondering, when amber is we are at risk of not delivering the action task on time, scope or budget, which is it of these that's causing it to remain at amber?
Oh, thank you very much for your question, Councillor Drysdale. I think this is an area, because we've been working on this for the last few years now, we're continually revising the work plan and adding to it. So I think it's because we continually identify new areas and new areas that we want to move into as our understanding of this work increases. So it's not that the work is not progressing, that it's that we're continually updating that and moving on from that, which is why it appears as ongoing. I'm not sure if Ross Drummond would want to add anything to that.
I would just like to add to what Jackie said. There are a number of stakeholder constituency groups across Perth and Kinross that we've got a very good product in terms of information and advice, and we have to tailor that to meet the needs of these different groups. Some of the challenges, geographic and demographics, in terms of where these groups or stakeholders are. We've done a lot of work with taxi drivers, private hire drivers. We're doing a lot of work with the licensing trade through the licensing committee. So it's about trying to get the information to the right people, the right information at the right time. There's a danger we can overwhelm them. So, as Jackie said, as we've got into this work over the last 2 or 3 years, more and more stakeholders are starting to surface and their needs are specific to them. At the moment, we're doing a lot of work now with the sports and recreation clubs, and we've got a lot of new information going out to nail bars, cafes, nighttime economy. That seems to be a particular area where there's a great need. So trying to address the needs of the nighttime economy, which is quite vast and quite varied, and trying to get that consistently across Perth and Kinross.
Okay, Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you for Provost. My question is just on the report in general. It was really about kind of numbers of children affected. I understand the need to protect identities with small numbers, which we might be dealing with, but it was just difficult to get a sense of how many young people in our area are affected by these issues, particularly child sexual exploitation. And also I was just wondering if you could give an idea of percentage of those identified that are accessing the services, particularly the newly established advisory group.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sarwar. This is an area that we've had a long, hard look at, because the numbers in Perth and Kinross that we're identifying are very small. And you'll see that in the report from the Child Protection Committee and the Standards and Quality report there. And we've worked hard to try and understand what is the profile in Perth and Kinross in a pretty spread geographical area. And we understand that the issues that our young people are facing are actually quite different to some of the very big cities or the central belt in Scotland. So the numbers are small, so we can't really report on that. And really just to advise you that the young people who have electing or agreeing or want to be part of the CSE advisory group are doing so for a number of reasons, and will include those who have some experience of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, but I can't really give you a percentage on that. So we've worked very hard with our police colleagues to try and understand what that profile is. The important thing is that we understand what child sexual exploitation is and what the different forms that can take, and that we work together to intervene and disrupt that wherever that might arise.
Can I just ask?
You have a supplementary?
Yeah, just generally.
You stand up, please, Councillor Sarwar.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Provost. It was just, I guess my point really was that if there are barriers to them accessing this service, are we able to identify those barriers, and is that an ongoing work?
I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to hear from young people themselves, what their experiences are, where they're getting their information and where they're getting the support. So we're learning from them, and that's where we're taking the direction from. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you, Jackie. Can I ask Councillor Lyle to move the report?
Thank you, Provost. This report describes the work being undertaken by the Child Protection Committee, the Child Sexual Exploitation Working Group, to tackle abuse and exploitation. The significant amount of work continues to be carried out through a comprehensive work plan and through participation in the National Stop to Listen Pathfinder work. The establishment of the Young People's Child Sexual Exploitation Advisory Group should be commended, as members are becoming highly influential in directing the work to safeguard our young people within our specific context. This report provides elected members of Perth and Kinross Council with a further opportunity to express publicly our individual and collective commitment to zero tolerance of abuse and exploitation. It is our intention to ensure that the community in Perth and Kinross is viewed as a hostile environment to any perpetrator of exploitation. It is a pleasure to move this report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Can I ask Councillor Shires to second the report?
Thank you, Provost. Pleased to support this report. Our zero tolerance approach to child sexual abuse and exploitation is clearly demonstrated throughout the report. And I would urge members to go and have a look at some of the background documents that are on the Council's website in relation to child protection and this specific area. I'd also like to thank our officers for the detailed and very clearly explained updates that we've received going back over some 4 or 5 years now. Yet again, we read evidence in this report of the huge importance of partnership working in tackling the issues in this area. The horrific coverage of child sexual exploitation we saw a few years ago in areas such as those in the north of England clearly brought into focus the challenges that local authorities and the partners have faced. It also allows us to view the work which is being done in Perth and Kinross to create that hostile environment to any perpetrator of exploitation, and to learn from others and to continually challenge our processes and evaluate practice. I would again highlight the huge commitment of officers and partners who serve on the Child Protection Committee and the Child Sexual Exploitation Working Group, and in particular Jackie Pepper, Hazel Robertson, Ross Drummond, Bill Atkinson, Sheena Devlin and all their teams right across the Council in doing that. And with that, I'll happily second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Are there any comments on the report? No? Can we agree the paper? Thank you. Item 14, the Perth Harbour Business Plan Progress Report. Can I invite Jim Valentine, Deputy Chief Executive, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. Councillors, in November 2017, in light of significant changes to ship movements and to ensure the future viability of the harbour, the Council agreed to develop an alternative business model. In April 2018, the Council agreed to appoint Calmac Ferries Limited as Perth Harbour operator. Today's report provides an update, noting that the handover has been successfully completed, with both the Council and Calmac Ferries Limited working together for mutual benefits. Although it is too early to formally measure the impact, the Harbour Board, who are keeping a close watch on the Council's behalf, is satisfied with the progress that's been made. To allow a bedding in period, the report proposes to use the next 6 months to test the model and produce a revised business plan, including a new targeted investment plan. The report also provides an update on progress to obtain the Marine Scotland licence for the dredging works. We're addressing the specific issues which have been raised through active engagement with all stakeholders, but we now anticipate that the dredging could not now take place until January to March 2020 at the earliest. This delay, though unfortunate, will allow the new business plan to be developed and the new model properly assessed prior to any final decision on dredging. Myself and Serge Morone are happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? First question is you, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Provost. A couple of questions. First of all, will the new business plan actually make a case for the harbour remaining open even though the dredging doesn't take place?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Robertson. It's really too early to say what the new model will look like for the harbour. We need to get in, we need to develop the plan, we need to see what Calmac's future plans are, and then make a decision on the dredging.
But the report we've had placed in front of us says that we'll have to extend the borrowing to allow us to carry out the dredging, and that it'll be quite difficult based on what the anticipated income might be from the harbour for us to repay that potential borrowing. So would it not be wise to try and work out a business case on both carrying out the dredging and not carrying out the dredging?
Sorry, Councillor Robertson, just to clarify, I know you didn't make yourself clear. What we'll be doing is looking at the business plan in respect of what Calmac think is the future for the harbour. We would then be coming back to Council with the business plan. That may or may not include the dredging being carried out, and then we would come back for a decision on the actual dredging. So the business plan will come back with what Calmac and ourselves see as the future of the harbour, and the dredging will be a subsequent decision following that.
Okay, Thanks, Jim. Councillor Forbes.
Promise my question has just been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No. Councillor Lyle, can you move the report, please?
Thank you very much, Provost. I'll be brief. In moving this report, I would state that this is a good news story which presents a positive picture for the new arrangements for Perth Harbour. While the delay in reaching an agreement with the pipeline operators is regrettable, it does allow time for a new business plan to be implemented and assessed prior to any decision on the works required. I would take the opportunity to thank the officers and to members of the Harbour Board who have taken their time to work the project up to this stage. I commend the paper to the Council.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett, can you second it?
Thank you, Provost. Provost, I welcome the progress report on the Harbour business plan in which we are asked to note the successful appointment of Calmac Ferries Limited to undertake harbour operations and the Harbour Master responsibilities for a 5-year period. As a member of the Harbour Board, I can say that already we are seeing progress to sweat the existing harbour assets harder and to generate an income from the harbour service boat, the Fairmaid of Perth, from nearby Tay Harbour operators. The report also summarises progress towards obtaining the dredging licence from Marine Scotland, acknowledging the complexities of extended negotiations with 2 pipeline companies, INEOS and Shell, over safe ways of working. Scottish Natural Heritage have now defined an appropriate window between January and March in which the river can be dredged, provided that a mitigation plan is implemented to protect freshwater mussels and possibly otters and beavers. Options on the most cost-effective means of disposing of dredged material are being fully explored. Under the resource implications section of the report, it stresses the financial uncertainties around the dredging scheme and particularly the impact of depressed activity in the coastal shipping market in relation to the viability of the prudential borrowing scheme to fund the dredging, which is now anticipated will cost £300,000 more than the additional capital allocation of £870,000. I'm sure that all members will want to scrutinise the revised harbour business plan closely next March before the final decision on dredging is made. Happy to second, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Dugan.
Just to welcome the report, Provost, and the reassuring summary that Mr Valentine gave as regards our joint venture with Calmac at the harbour going forward. I too would join the Leader of the Council in thanking the efforts of the Harbour Board as they've carried the ambition of Perth Kinross Council through some fairly difficult times and you could even say choppy waters, but I won't. But nevertheless, I think now that we have Calmac in place, we're very much in a better position than we found ourselves previously. A serious shipping operator is interested in Perth Harbour and interested in developing that business, work that's already begun under their stewardship, and we should be very grateful for that. And just finally and very briefly, Provost, you may know, you may recall, I've previously been very critical of officers and the approach that we've taken to Perth Harbour, measured and critical, Provost. And it's only fair that as a result of a lot of work by officers and some fairly strategic thought and application of that thought, we find ourselves in a much better place. So officers are to be commended for those efforts likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dugan. Any other comments? No. Agree the paper?
Agreed.
Item 15, initial findings of the review of the scheme of establishment for community councils in Perth Kinross. You can invite Gillian Taylor to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. Councillors, in March 2018 you agreed to undertake a review of the current scheme of establishment for community councils and to hold a series of meetings with elected members and representatives of each of the community councils, with the meetings based on each of the action partnership areas. These meetings were intended to allow community councils to have a dedicated opportunity to discuss their future role and support requirements and to clarify particular areas of concern that had been expressed with regard to the current scheme. The report before you today sets out the findings from these meetings and makes recommendations in terms of amendments to the scheme and on next steps. Provost, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Are there any questions on the report?
Councillor Watt.
Sorry, I got a mental block there. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Provost. I'd like to thank officers for the work they've done with this, especially in protecting EU nationals' ability to remain as members of community councils. I do have one question. Can I ask officers what would be required to seamlessly update the scheme of establishment in future to bring in line with any changes that could come into effect as part of the electoral franchise bill that's been promised as part of the Scottish Government's programme for government for this year, with the potential of enabling EU nationals to actually still vote in community councils elections?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Waters, for the question. I'm aware that that's obviously a proposal in the expected to come forward in the electoral franchise bill. And as we did back in 2015, 2016, I think, when the reduced voting age came in for Scottish Parliament elections, local government elections, we updated the scheme at that time. So it would be a short report to Council at that time if when the bill came to fruition and there was a change. We would make sure that the scheme was consistent with whatever was in legislation, and we would just bring that to Council and ask for Council's approval.
Can I just ask, regarding our standing orders in the time our report can come back before Council, how would that be affected? Would we have the ability to bring it forward, or would we have to wait because of standing orders?
Chairman, given that this is my last meeting of the full Council in this chamber, I could perhaps be afforded a little comment in that I would be very surprised if the electoral franchise bill was actually through the whole parliamentary process within the 6-month period we set out in standing orders. But I think if the legislative position changed within that 6-month period, then standing orders do provide that we can bring that back right away to Council because the statutory position has changed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Provost. To reassure everyone, this is a question, although it may not sound like one at first. The community councils often feel that they are ignored and not taken seriously, despite their role as a statutory body and consultee. And therefore, I think it's very positive that we are undertaking this review. I'll restrict my remarks not to things that I can comment on in the consultation on the substance of the policy, but I'd like to just ask whether some of these issues that I picked up could be addressed before it goes out to public consultation, both in the proposed action plan and also in the scheme of establishment. In terms of on page 536, where we're talking about planning and that community councils are statutory consultees and that they feel that when a CC objects to an application they should be listened to. Having attended one of the 3 meetings on this issue, I don't think the proposed action directly addresses the concerns of community councils. It's just a statement of fact. I think from their perspective they were asking for additional weight to be given to their considerations, or perhaps for automatic right of a application to go to committee should a community council object to it. Now the point is not whether or not you agree with that, but actually the proposed action doesn't address their concern. The proposed action should say something along the lines of where that discussion would take place, whether that would be through the planning process, the planning review we're doing at scrutiny, or through Environment and Infrastructure Committee. So it's not a comment on, it's not a question to address, to change the proposal, but about addressing directly their concerns. On page 537, in terms of emails, the Community Council said that they receive an awful lot of emails. This was directly about emails that they get from Perth and Kinross Council. Clearly, we cannot take action to stop emails coming from external bodies, but we should be doing all we can to try and make communication with community councils easier. They're often given a lot of things in terms of surveys to look at and information that they have to digest, and I don't think I accept that we can't take any action to reduce the number of communications that they receive and to try and make that process easier. On page 538, community council status should be acknowledged within PKC and not fobbed off, and acknowledgements for planning department to emails, etc. Are often ignored. I think it's slightly ironic that these 2 points are the only 2 in the entire report where the feedback doesn't have a proposed action when it's talking about community councils being ignored or not listened to. So I think we should at least have a response to that. My final point is on the scheme of establishment itself. Councillor Waters has addressed one of the issues that I was going to raise, but on page 554, under 12.3, it says membership of a community council is invalidated should a community council member's name no longer appear on the electoral register for that community council area. This is now inconsistent with 6.5, where we've now said that European Union citizens can serve on community councils. But I will restrict my full comments to the public consultation, but I'd just like to ask if those points could be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Purvis, for the questions. In relation to the points on page 536, I think there are further, I apologise if you feel that the report fell short in terms of a response to the points that had been made, but I think that this is a matter, what's before the Council is the issues in relation to the Community Council. I think the wider question of the role of Community Councils and in relation to the planning process is perhaps something that can be picked up at the Planning Member Officer Group in terms of looking at the planning bill and how we take forward some aspects of that. In relation to emails from Perth and Kinross Council, it's difficult to strike that balance between community councils feeling that they're not informed and feeling that they get too much information. And we're working with colleagues in IT to see if we can find another way of having a repository for information. I'm conscious that colleagues in other councils have developed SharePoint style sites for community councils, so that's something that we are looking at so that we can say, we can set up alerts and go and look at that rather than it being sometimes quite large emails that we send out with consultation or questions, etc. In terms of acknowledgement of community councils, correspondence. Apologies that there isn't a proposed action in there, but I'm sure that I can discuss that with my colleague, the Executive Director of Housing and Environment, and we can put something in there. And thank you for picking out the inconsistency between the new provision and part of the old provision. We'll make sure that that's picked up before the scheme goes out for public consultation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Provost. Can I ask a question about finance? There's quite a big difference in the size of community councils and populations covered. Some community councils only meet once every 2 months and have a relatively small population, so their administrative grant works fine. Other larger community councils like Kinross, for example, cover a big population and have a lot of work. And Kinross, because of the amount of grant it gets, can't even afford to employ a minute secretary. And that's actually caused a bit of disruption in the community council itself because the secretary is so fed up with doing the minutes and doing all the correspondence that she's resigned. So is there a way that we can actually look at the funding based on population on electoral rolls as well as just a block grant? Is that possible?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Robertson. I guess the initial answer to that is that anything is possible. We have tried, over the many years that I've been involved with working in community councils, we have tried many ways of trying to look at ways of disbursing the funding. And whilst, in terms of scale, yes, probably some of the larger community councils do more, but some of the small community councils do a lot as well. So I think it's difficult to get that balance. In terms of making sure that everybody has a reasonable amount of funding. Hence, we've just gone for one amount for every community council, and that's the way it has been for a number of years. But as you'll know, we changed the position a few years ago that where a community council hadn't spent any money, then it didn't get a top-up grant. So the money that community councils do receive now is very much related to their activity, and if they are very active in spending their grant, then they get the full grant the following year. If they're not as active and not spending that full grant, then they don't get that same amount. But it's something that we can look at, but we're happy to receive any suggestions on how we might have a better system that actually doesn't result in somebody or some community council being disadvantaged, because one of the major issues that has come out, as always comes out in these consultations, is that in terms of finding meeting rooms and paying for meeting rooms, what's available in some areas, not available in other areas, and some community councils are having to pay quite a lot of money for meeting room hire. So that's one of the big variables that we always have to take account of when we're thinking about what the administration grant level should be like and how that can be dispersed across the 46 community councils. But happy to think about it again.
Thank you. Councillor McDade.
Thank you very much, Provost. A couple of quick questions. One of the recommendations is to have the AGMs in November, except in the year of a CC election. And I'm just wondering where it can be moved. I'm just wondering if it might make sense to have it in a different month where it would then be unaffected regardless of whether there's an election or not. Another question was around membership numbers and the rationale behind them. Aberfeldy, for example, has 3/5 of the population of Pitlochry, but has more community councillors. Another question I had was about, in fact, just to follow up on Councillor Robertson's point, as a former community council treasurer, I would quite like to see the level go up. I'm quite like the current system, but I think if the level went up to, say, £1,000, that way the bigger community councils could spend the extra money they require, but the smaller ones who maybe don't, and also takes into account those who have monthly meetings versus those who don't.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Sorry, you want to say something?
Well, as it was a question, I thought I ought to answer.
Sorry, it's just...
Seems only fair. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor McDade. In terms of the timing of the AGMs, we have changed that actually at the request of the community councils themselves, and hopefully that will find widespread support when we go out in public consultation. And I would have to say, obviously, that consultation process will include all community councils themselves and all members in this chamber. Membership, very happy to discuss how that's constituted across each of the different areas. Very happy to have a discussion about that in terms of finalising the scheme. And finance, as I've said already, we're happy to look at what the options might be on that going forward. But I would be surprised if we were able to find additional money for each and every one of the potential 53 community councils.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Provost. Some of the proposals are very constructive. I wanted to just, I've got a couple of questions, but I wanted to draw attention just to maybe one, the 3.4, a series of updated guidance notes. Sorry, this is 3.4 in the report rather than in the scheme. A series of updated guidance notes will be provided, including in relation to data protection, finance and dealing with complaints. I thought from my time as a community councillor that it would be useful to provide, rather than maybe a series of individual guidance notes, an actual handbook for community councils. And I think the other item that I would pull out in relation, the key item that I would, or two key items rather, that I would pull out in relation to things that community councils might find off the top of my head useful to know about, would be insurance matters. I know that finance is there, but specifically insurance matters, and contact details within the council. So I know that we've got our service email addresses that councillors can use, but I thought that would be useful for community councils as well. But pulling it together in a handbook might make it a little bit more cohesive for community councils to deal with. Just thinking about it as I'm speaking, actually, another issue here. No, it's all right. I'll leave that for the public consultation. Another question I was going to ask was, there was a couple of questions on the actual proposed revisions to the scheme. And the first one is 7.7, co-option to community councils, section subparagraph 3 in Roman numerals. And this is about the automatic transfer of a co-opted member to a full member with the same rights, and that the full member would no longer be counted within the ratio of co-opted members. And I just wondered about the democratic rationale for that, because obviously in the initial community council elections, those nominations and elections are made in due process, but this is a co-option becoming a full council member, and I was just a little bit uneasy about the democratic mandate that those co-opted becoming full community council members would have. My last question was on the process of the consultation. I'm glad to see that there's a positive response about the change to the Cooper Angus and Bendocky Community Council area, which is in, well, Cooper Angus is in my ward, but Bendocky is in Ward 3. But there are other suggested boundary changes as well. And one of the proposed actions in relation to all of the boundary changes is that the public should be consulted, and I just wondered what steps, how we would go through that process of the public should be consulted on those proposed boundary changes, whether that's something that elected members take on or if there's another mechanism for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I hope I managed to pick up all of the points that have just been made there. We have looked in the past about actually producing a handbook for elected members, for community council members, but to be honest, there hadn't been much support. They preferred to have information in a different format and prefer to have that digitally, but certainly be something we can revisit. From recollection, I think the insurance is actually covered in the finance guidance, but I'll double check that. Clearly the contact details, we can try and provide that. I think the difficulty with providing a handbook sometimes is that as people move around within a community council, the handbook doesn't necessarily follow that individual. In relation to co-opted members, I think the rationale for putting that particular clause into the scheme and testing the waters with that clause is that we, as you will probably all know yourselves, is that we're often finding ourselves in situations where we're having to go to by-elections because co-opted members have stepped aside or because they feel that their time isn't being valued. There are different reasons why co-opted members choose to step away, and we end up in by-elections. So I think that was to test the water about trying to make co-opted members feel that they're more part of the community council from the start. In terms of boundary changes, it's over to the community councils to consult with the public in the relevant areas, because I mean one of the ones that I suspect we've not picked up in the Kinrossshire areas, the proposed changes across I think is about 3 different community council areas, the little bits going to different areas. But I mean that's really for the community councils who are going to be affected to undertake that public consultation. It's not a role we would expect elected members to undertake other than in their role as ex officio members of a community council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baird. You had your hand up. Right, thank you. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Provost. Gillian, just in light of your vast experience in this area, I'm just seeking your help and guidance on something which it's obvious that across rural Perthshire and Kinross, the existence of community councils is widespread and almost complete, whereas in the city of Perth, looking at these statistics here, it's alarming to see that only something like 22% of the electorate within the city boundaries is represented by community councils. In your experience, as I say, what are the issues for that and what can be done to address it?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Drysdale, for the easy question. I think it would be interesting to know why there is such a difference between the rural area and the urban area. Perhaps in the urban area there's less of a sense of a need for a community council. Sometimes there are other organisations who individuals within a community, within an urban setting might feel represent their interests better. There have been a number of attempts to get particular community councils revived, and those have stumbled and stuttered, and some have come through and others have just fallen away again. So I don't think there's a particular one answer to one area within the urban area, but I do wonder if it's to do with whether there are other organisations which people in those communities feel represent their interests better. I can't offer you any more of a conclusion than that.
Okay. Thank you. I think we've just... Oh, Councillor Barnacle.
Very Very briefly, Provost, just picking up on Councillor Stewart's question about consultation on boundary changes, Gillian. Are we talking about circulating a letter to residents in the affected places, or a meeting about it, or both? Is it prescriptive, or is it up to the CC?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Barnacle, for the question. I think it's very much up to the community councils themselves as to what they think would work best in their areas. Because clearly, depending on the size of the area, a different approach will work differently. But I would suggest that it at least has to be a public meeting where it's discussed, and then notice given, but certainly at least a public meeting. But other than that, or in addition to that, it would really be for the community councils to do what they think would work best in their areas.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Convener. My Provost, sorry. My question is regarding the rationale for sub-areas. I see that some community councils have the sub-areas and others don't. And out in rural areas, I feel that perhaps some community councils, the representation's all bunched into one area, which is not really representing the whole of the community. And I wonder why the rationale is given to the gift of the community councils to decide if they have sub-areas or not.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. It is over to the community councils. I think at the time that some places have had sub-areas for a long time, and some community councils have really struggled to get representatives from those sub-areas, and some have had to run without representatives from those sub-areas. I don't think we can be prescriptive. If a community council feels that it would have better spread of representation if it had sub-areas, then we're happy to look at that, but it can lead to difficulties in future if that individual moves on and then you don't have someone who's prepared to step up to represent that smaller area. But we would hope that a community council, notwithstanding that the membership might be clustered in one particular geographical area, would still work with the whole of that community council area. But it really is a matter for we wouldn't want to be prescriptive about whether or not each community council should have a sub-area network.
Okay, happy with that? If there's no more questions, I'll ask Councillor Lyle to move the report.
Thank you, Provost. As members of the Council will be aware, the outputs from the Scottish Government and COSLA and the joint review of local governments from both are intended to inform a programme of changes to local governance arrangements, potentially through the development of a local democracy bill which will arrive late in the term of the current Scottish Parliament. These may well have a profound impact on the future of community councils. However, as community empowerment continues to develop in the current context, and as community councils continue to operate in that context, it is important that the scheme of establishment and the associated documents and the support arrangements for community councils recognise that role. I would move that the Council approves the recommendations set out in this report.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. Councillor Barrett, you second the report.
Thanks, Provost. In seconding Councillor Lyle, I'd just like to say that the proposed changes to the scheme of establishment of community councils as set out in paragraph 3.2 and highlighted in Appendix 2 seem sensible and to address the issues raised by community councils during the consultation. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments on the report? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. Just a small comment that I find it astounded that I'm actually in agreement with our member for Kinross, Councillor Robertson. I think it would be an excellent idea that there would be funding found in these community councils for minute secretary, and perhaps we could look at community councils that are serving over a population of over 3,000, and perhaps we could look at that, because I have 3 community councils and I know the secretary does a lot of work because of the amount of people they have to get round, and I would recommend that that be looked at.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. We agree the report? Thank you. Item 16. This is proposed timetable of meetings for 2019. So, Gillian, you're not finished yet in your last one. I can invite Gillian Taylor again.
Thank you, Provost. In recognition of the points that were agreed by Council when approving the 2018 timetable of meetings in relation both to the timing of the Lifelong Learning Committee and seeking to concentrate meetings on Mondays and Wednesdays, there has been further discussion through the Modernising Governance Member Officer Group, and the outcomes are set out in the report before you. Whilst in my report I was able to recommend dates for approval by the Council, at that point I was asking Council to determine the start times for public meetings on Wednesdays, but to otherwise agree the start times as had been set out in the timetable. However, following further discussion with elected members, I understand that there is broad agreement in relation to the timing of public meetings on Wednesdays, and that they would be as follows: morning meetings commencing at 9:30 a.m, afternoon meetings commencing at 1 p.m, council meetings commencing at 11 a.m. with a break for lunch at 1 and a further short break if required at 3, and the Common Good Fund Committee meetings commencing at 9:30 a.m. on the same day as council meetings. Provost, thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions? Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. Could you just repeat those timings again, please, Gillian? You went too fast for me to note them down.
I know how that feels, Councillor McCall. So the proposal, and I'm not moving this, I'm simply putting this to Council. Morning meetings commence at 9:30 a.m, afternoon meetings commence at 1 p.m, council meetings would commence at 11 a.m. with a break for lunch at approximately 1 p.m, and a further short break if required at approximately 3 p.m, and Common Good Fund committees commencing at 9:30 a.m. on the same day as council meetings.
Any other questions?
Councillor McCall.
Oh, sorry, Bob, I couldn't see you there.
Must have lost that much weight.
It was your hand, I couldn't see.
Gillian, could you confirm the order of Common Good Funds on the DFO Council? This morning seemed to work well, that we were finished in ample time to allow, Perth Common Good was finished in ample time to allow other Common Goods to come in and complete their business. I don't know whether that's meant by the 9:30.
My recollection of the discussion, sorry, thank you, Provost, thank you, Councillor Brown. My recollection of the discussion at the member officer group was that Perth would be held last, so that the other ones would come first with Perth last.
Councillor McCall.
Sorry, mine was just for clarity. I believe this is on service committees, is that correct? Or is that all committees?
The intention would be that it would be public committee meetings on a Wednesday, but clearly if you would wish us to look at something different in relation to planning and development management, we'd be happy to do that.
I have a concern over, because we have so limited notice of deputations, that this would apply both to planning and development and to the LRB, that actually fitting in.
Apologies, the local review body is not included in those different start times. That will stay at 10 o'clock on the Tuesdays. There's only meetings
so the
that are
planning
held
and
on a
development,
Wednesday.
just pure and simple fact that you get notification of deputations earlier on in the week. It just allows a pre-meeting prior to the meeting if it was continued at 10 o'clock. But if that could be looked at, that would be beneficial. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I've got some reservations regarding the proposal for Common Good Funds to commence at 9:30, particularly if full council is meant to commence at 11 o'clock. Councillor Band mentioned that today's Common Good Fund meetings progressed fairly swiftly, but they still took a whole 2 hours to conclude. And if that was to be the norm, then trying to start a council meeting, it means that everybody is going to be held up. So I'm kind of fairly relaxed about what time the meetings start in general, but I think trying to programme common goods and a council meeting starting at 11 o'clock is just going to lead to problems. Whether this is something that the member officer working group can look at in conjunction with the committee structures, that may be a way forward rather than leaping in to make a decision today.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I have a sense that elected members in the chamber would like to have some indication of when meetings would be, so I would be reluctant to defer consideration of the timetable any further than this meeting. I'm sorry if I misunderstood you, Councillor Barrett. I'll sit down.
Sorry, thanks, Gillian. I was only pointing out the difficulties with regard to the Common Good Fund and full council. I mean, if people want to run with the others, then fine. But I think that the full council, these are just going to lead to problems, and that we therefore shouldn't do that.
I suggest that it's a timetable that works when we have council at Christmas, but then maybe everyone is focused on Christmas lunch at that point. But the 9:30 and 11 o'clock timings work at that point. Clearly I'm in councillors' hands as to whether we want to try that or whether we want to have further discussion at the member officer group.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to move the paper.
Provost, if I might.
I merely wanted to say that I thought the Perth Common Good going first this morning made sense, and those of us that are travelling in from further flung places, if we were to be the first Common Good, would not make sense, and it would make sense to have the sort of order we had this morning, so that we are in a better place.
Councillor Dugan.
I think, and I'm looking to the leader of the council with whom I've discussed this, I think we're almost there. I think Councillor Barrett makes a reasonable point about getting the common goods discharged ahead of an 11 o'clock council. I wonder if it might be helpful. I've just got approval from the convener that Perth can go first for common good, and it can start at 9. We're all in Perth. That's not onerous for Perth members, so I think that might give a better window, and we can get a timetable with timings nailed down. If that's agreeable to the leader.
It's agreeable to me. I'm keen that we expedite this today.
Yep.
Sorry, rather than drag it on. And if Councillor McDade wants a long line in the morning, so be it. Okay. Okay, are we okay with that? Right. We're agreed. Right. Excellent. We're nearly there, folks. 17 amendments to the Scheme of Administration Standing Orders. Can we agree the amendments as set out in the agenda? And 18 membership of High Constables. Can we agree the position as set out on the agenda? Thank you. Before you all go, sorry, Peter, you got something to say?
Yeah, just very briefly on a point of information, Provost, could I point out, whilst we were setting the council calendar, that it is Wear Red Day on Friday in support of show racism, the red card. We've just received late notice of that. Any councillors who wish to take part in demonstrating, councillors and officers who wish to take part in demonstrating their support for show racism, the red card, and by wearing red on Wednesday, we'll circulate details of the event that they can participate in for that. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Before you all go, I just wanted to make a point that this will be the last day, our last full council that Gillian will take part in. And she's been a... Yes? And will there be an awful lot said later on before Gillian leaves at the end of November. But I just think as this was the last full council meeting, you might wish to convey your support and thanks to Gillian.